Welcome to our third episode on the book of Ruth. Naomi had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I kind of mispronounced the name of the older boy last time. I called him Mahlon. But if you take a closer look at the Hebrew, you find that the H in the middle of the word is not a simple H, but a guttural or vocalized H. It's not an aspirated H. It's not Mahlon. It's a deep voiced H. Mahlon, pronounced by European Jews as Mahlon, but by Middle Eastern Jews as Mahlon. We can identify it phonetically with a little quarter-sickle. We call it a quarter-sickle in branding underneath the H, and that says that is that special kind of H. It's a different phoneme that doesn't exist in the English language, that doesn't exist outside of the Semitic world, and so it has been transliterated variously into various languages without a lot of consistency. But we'll call him Mahlon from now on because that is the name that he would answer to. Mahlon and Chilion obviously rhyme with each other. I don't think there would be any difficulty of Naomi accidentally calling out for Mahlon when she meant Chilion, or Chilion when she meant Mahlon. But the ON ending seems to have been very popular in the family on Elimelech's side. There is a family tree given at the very end of the book, and we find that preceding Elimelech in the tree, there was a man named Hezron and a man named Nahshon. Yes, there is that funny H again. And a man named Salmon. They must have named the fish after him. As well as someone not in the family tree, but who appears prominently in the book of Judges, which is Samson. I don't think anybody knows what that ON ending meant, whether it was a diminutive or whether it was an enlargement, or whether it was an endearment. Anyway, it was popular in the family. So it is likely that Naomi let Elimelech name the children, since they rhyme with his ancestors. Just a theory. Here's something that's not a theory. Mahlon was the older brother, and Chilion was the younger brother. Twice in chapter 1, the author of the book of Ruth lists the two brothers with Mahlon first. And it was common Hebrew narrative practice always to list the older brother first. Still in the New Testament, it is Peter who is the older brother of Andrew, and so always listed first. It is James, the older brother of John, and therefore always listed first. There might be an occasion when, for some good reason, the order would be switched, but it would have to be a very good reason, because otherwise it would insult the seniority. In chapter 1, Mahlon and Chilion are being listed in the order of their birth, as is normal. But in chapter 4, they are being listed in the order of their death. Chapter 4 contains a partial transcript of a session of probate court, in which they consider first the death of Elimelech, what were his assets, and to whom did they go? They went to his firstborn, Mahlon. And who died next? Chilion. And to whom did his assets go? To his older brother, Mahlon. And then Mahlon has died, And to whom do all these accumulated assets go? The assets of Elimelech, compounded with those of Chilion, compounded with those of Mahlon. The narrator has just informed us in no uncertain terms that Chilion preceded his older brother in death. All three of these deaths took place within a 10-year period. The father died, the younger son died, and the older son died. Then it rained, and the family could go back to Judea, but without these three men. Doesn't it seem odd that 2 generations of men in the family passed away within the space of a single decade? This seems to be a somewhat accelerated rate, which is in danger of making this family disappear from the face of the earth, which is the precise danger that Naomi, the first and oldest of the widows, has to cope with for the rest of the book. Doesn't it look suspiciously like some kind of plague is going on here? You know, this is the Bible we're talking about. There are a lot of plagues in the Bible. And so I'm going to present you with another theory, a little more serious, which is the theory that there was a plague attacking the men in Moab. Here's the deal. Plagues often happen after a drought. First, there is no rain. People begin to starve, but also wildlife begin to starve. Plants die, animals that eat plants die, animals that eat animals die, and people die, in somewhat that order. Among the animals that are threatened by a drought are field mice and rats. Rodents eat plants that are produced by humans, so they hover around the fields. When the fields produce nothing, the people are in trouble, but the rodents are also in trouble. And hungry rodents become vicious and form packs and roam from place to place, attacking silos of food, invading storehouses, invading homes, attacking people, and migrating across the countryside in desperate search for water and food. These rodents bring their animal diseases with them, and so the sequence goes: drought, rodents, plague. The information is sketchy for much of ancient history. Sometimes just the plague will be described, sometimes just the drought will be described, and sometimes just the mice will be described. Herodotus, the Greek historian, describes only the mice attacking Sennacherib's army outside of Jerusalem. The biblical accounts describe an angel of the Lord, that is, a plague, attacking and killing them. And scientific data indicates that it was a period of severe drought. So who is right? All of them are right. It was drought, it was mice, and it was plague. The disruption continued for decades even after Naomi returned to Bethlehem. The first book of Samuel, chapter 5, describes an attack of plague in Philistia, the land where the Philistines lived next to Judea. And it says in verse 6, Adonai dealt severely with the Ashdodites. He ravaged and afflicted Ashdod and its vicinity with tumors. The Septuagint, and also Josephus in his parallel account, adds these words: He ravaged them with mice, which swarmed them on the ships. Into the midst of their land they surged, and there was mortal panic in the city. The mention of ships is interesting because rats ride ships around across the oceans and seas of the world by climbing up the ropes. Here, these were probably grain ships that were in port at Ashdod, and the rats were after food. They could sense that there was food on these ships, and they swarmed onto them. Also, they surged through the land. It looks like just one city and its vicinity are attacked here. But 1 Samuel 6:4 tells us 5 corresponds to the number of Philistine lords. The same plague has struck all of you and your lords. In other words, the entire land of the Philistines, which is basically the entire coastland of the Holy Land, were attacked by rodents coming down out of the hills and mountains, heading toward the sea, looking for food wherever they could find it. Death was everywhere. It was death from starvation because of drought. It was death by plague as a secondary effect of the search of the rodents for food. Back in chapter 5, the author describes the effects of all of this. Those who escaped death were afflicted with tumors. Yes, that's bubonic. And the outcry from the city went up to the heavens. This reminds me of how the women weep in the book of Ruth. In verse 9 of chapter 1, the women are kissing and weeping, lamenting for the death of Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion. The Hebrew reads, What tishhak lahem, what tisena kolon, what tivkena. She kissed them, they raised their voices, they wept. And then 5 verses later, to stress that this is a prolonged weeping, again the author says, What tisena kolon, what tivkena roth. They raised their voices, still they wept. Let's excuse ourselves now and let the women grieve undisturbed. Next time we'll take a closer look at the 2 younger women, the Moabite widows of Mahlon and Chilion. See you then.